and welcome to APICS Extra Live, Why New Knowledge is Power, with Brian Watson and Dr. Steve Hummel. My name is Jennifer Storelli, Associate Editor at APICS. Before we begin, I'd like to run through a few details. At the end of the presentation, we'll save time for a question and answer session. If you look at the right toolbar on your screen, you'll see a questions box. To ask your question at any time during the presentation, simply type it in the box and click Send. Should you experience any technical difficulties during today's broadcast, please call GoToWebinar Tech Support at 1-805-617-7000. Again, that's 1-805-617-7000. This presentation is being recorded and will be available at apics.org/extralive early next week. And now it's my pleasure to introduce our speakers for today. Brian Watson, CPIM, Jonah, is a professor of supply chain management at Conestoga College Institute of Technology and Advanced Learning in Ontario. He also is past president of the APICS Ontario Grand Valley chapter. Dr. Steve Hummel is a professional engineer and a professor of strategy and supply chain management at Conestoga College Institute of Technology and Advanced Learning, as well as an adjunct faculty member at DHBW in Stuttgart, Germany. Brian and Steve are two of the co-authors of the APICS magazine article, Impossible to Replicate, which is available online, in print, and in the APICS magazine tablet app. Everyone, please give a warm welcome to our presenters.
Hello, everyone. My name's Stephen Hummel. Brian and I would like to acknowledge the contribution of our co-author, Dr. Kenneth Harling, who unfortunately could not join us today. Kenneth Harling is a full professor of strategy at Wilfrid Laurier University in Waterloo, Ontario, and he also spends substantial time at Purdue University in Indiana in the United States. Kenneth's experience is very rich, particularly in food and food manufacturing, and he indeed has even worked during his career at the OECD in Paris. Brian will cover our objective today, as well as Jennifer did a great job introducing myself and Brian. Brian will talk briefly about our school here at Conestoga so that you can understand how supply chain is so important to what we do every day. We'll then move from there into what our reality, and there should be no surprises, and this will help to frame the relevance of today's webinar. Finally, we'll get into the meat of the presentation, which is really the secret sauce, or why new knowledge is power. Brian?
Thanks, Stephen. So we hope today to illustrate for everyone that a firm can be hyper-competitive or best-in-class through more effective utilization of the resources that it already has, already at its disposal, but may be currently missing or are in fact unaware of. Our presentation comes out of our experience and interest in improving organizational performance and the impact that organizational knowledge creation and innovation has on helping firms create a sustainable competitive advantage. As Stephen pointed out, Jennifer has already introduced us, so let me take a moment to tell you about Conestoga College, where we are and what we do here. So Conestoga College is a publicly funded college with our main campus located in southern Ontario in the city of Kitchener. We have campuses in Waterloo, Ontario, Cambridge, Ontario, Ingersoll, and Stratford as well, I believe, as well as Guelph, Ontario. So we have a number of campuses, approximately 12,000 full-time day students, and approximately 40,000 part-time students go through our various classes here at the college in any single year. We're about a one-hour drive west of Toronto, the home of the Toronto Raptors, and maybe next year Raptors. That also places us between 2.5 hours and 3 hours of 3 border crossings with the United States. So we are very close in terms of being able to trade with our biggest trading partners to the south. In our region, there are approximately 500,000 people, And within our region, there are 3 world-class universities, including the University of Waterloo, Wolf University, the University of Guelph, and of course our own Conestoga College. Conestoga College offers post-secondary education including certificates, diplomas, degrees, and postgraduate diplomas in a range of disciplines including business, hospitality, information technology, engineering and technology, and health sciences. In our supply chain cluster of programs, we offer a 2-year purchasing diploma, a 3-year advanced diploma in supply chain and operations management, both in a cooperative education format and in a regular format, as well as a 4-year Bachelor of Business Administration in International Business Management with a supply chain specialization. We have a long-standing partnership with APICS through the Ontario Grand Valley chapter, a partnership that has seen a student chapter here on campus for over 30 years, and we currently boast to have the largest student chapter here in Canada. Our advanced diploma, for your interest, is the theme of the program is continuous improvement, with Dr. Deming's system of profound knowledge woven throughout the curriculum. And with respect to our degree program, our degree specialization, it was developed using the APICS Supply Chain Manager Competency Model and the CSCP designation as our guide. So that brings us to our reality. I think we could all agree that competition is accelerating. I don't think anyone would disagree with that. It's certainly becoming more complex as well. And everyone is doing their best trying to keep up, whether it's in training, new technology, seeking out best practices. And the bottom line is, when we're all doing the same thing, same as our competitors, this leads us all ultimately to a zero-sum game or a red ocean. Now we're talking about this in the context of Dr. Michael Porter's work on competitive strategy, recognizing that industries are bounded and competition within those industries is based on the relative strengths of the 5 forces within that industry. And given that they're bounded, profit within an industry and profit for all the firms within an industry is governed by the rules established by the interaction of those 5 forces. As competition intensifies, as we have already suggested it is, continuing to do, we end up with a lose-lose game. In order for my company to win, your company must lose. So we need to break away from the crowd. What do we need to do differently as organizations to break out from this? Stephen.
Well, I call it the dirty little secret. And that phrase comes from a lifetime as a turnaround CEO, as well as being a professional academic for the last 10 years. Really, it's quite straightforward. One has to strive for a competitive advantage that meets 2 criteria. First, you have to create an advantage that's really hard to copy. And of course, that's easier said than done. And in addition, you've got to have a competitive advantage, which makes it very difficult for your core competitors or new entrants to be able to implement. And of course, if you do this, you can erect some barriers and preserve advantage for some time period. The real key is the beginning. The architect of our profession is probably Dr. Peter Drucker. And the phrase that I most remember from his work, that I certainly used in industry and academia, is you have to be effective before you can be efficient. And in the context of industry, you have to convince a customer to spend money on your product or service. That's really the only place in any industry value chain where money truly changes hands, because everything else is driven from that. So the key is to figure out how to entice the customer to do business with you on a preferred basis, and then use your skills to figure out how to do that as efficiently as possible, right?
Well, we think APICS is cool. And we say that because we truly believe members of APICS, those that pursue APICS certification, will ultimately have a competitive advantage. Please note Dr. Drucker's comment on the bottom of this slide. Knowledge is not just another resource alongside traditional factors of production like labor, capital, and land. In reality, it is the only meaningful resource today. Knowledge and continuous knowledge creation is key to improving oneself and the performance of the organizations that we all work for. We believe that APICS provides education toward developing knowledge and the skills needed for both current and future managers in supply chain and operations management. And those competencies, those skills, are outlined quite clearly in the APICS Supply Chain Manager Competency Model and are embodied in the CSCP certification. Competencies like the foundational competencies of interpersonal skills, continuous learning, creativity, continuous improvement, workplace and leadership competencies including problem solving, decision making, customer focus, conflict management, planning and organizing. Academic competencies like analytical thinking, applied science and technology. Professional competencies like strategy and implementation, supply chain management, process improvement, and Six Sigma, risk management, lean management, and technology application. Ultimately, when the knowledge that we create, when the knowledge that we possess is unique to a business, meaningful to a customer and or firm performance, and implementable, it can provide a firm or an organization with a sustainable competitive advantage. Dr. Michael Polanyi, he was a physician and held a PhD in physical chemistry, but probably better known for his theory of knowledge and philosophy of science. In his book, The Tacit Dimension, first published in 1966, and I believe it was another edition was published in '83, captured and differentiated for us two different types of knowledge. The first type of knowledge he identified as explicit knowledge. This would be the knowledge that we find in written documents, codified, written down, computer code, musical scores, documents of any type, the type of knowledge that we use in our classrooms here at the college, all written down, recorded from previous knowledge. Because it's available, so broadly available, it's documented and broadly available, it becomes a poor source of competitive advantage ultimately, because it's knowledge that was created in the past. Dr. Polanyi went on to describe another type of knowledge, tacit knowledge. Tacit knowledge is difficult to express. It's embedded in humans, and it identifies itself or becomes identifiable through experience, through the interaction of people. It's not written down, and only through the interaction of people occurring in the moment does it identify itself. In 1995, Drs. Nanaka and Takeuchi, in their research culminating in the publication of their book, The Knowledge Creating Company, went on to describe tacit and explicit knowledge this way. They describe tacit knowledge as here and now knowledge. Knowledge created in the moment based on the circumstances that were occurring at that point in time, versus explicit knowledge described as there and then knowledge, knowledge created in the past. They also went on to identify that tacit knowledge becomes the basis of all new knowledge creation, as it resides in individuals. And in and of themselves, firms do not create new knowledge. They can only create an environment that is favorable to the creation of new knowledge through their employees and others in their environment. They went on to identify, or used an analogy to help explain this further. So let me share it with you. First, they talked about explicit knowledge in the context of a relay race. Now, I think we can all imagine the 4x100 relay race that's going to be run in the Summer Olympics coming up in Rio. They speak about a relay race in the context of explicit knowledge, and we can frame it in scientific management, in the idea of scientific management. Explicit knowledge, run the race this way, run it between the lines, run straight ahead, do exactly as we tell you, don't look to the left, don't look to the right, look straight ahead. When you hear the starter's pistol, you take off running, you pass the baton to the next person, do not deviate from what we tell you. And we can well imagine that that is exactly how a relay race is run. However, that all works great until the runner drops a baton, or steps on a line, or the runner beside you trips and falls and knocks you over. And the minute there's any type of deviation, you are out of the game. There are no do-overs. You must follow the rules explicitly, and if you don't, you are out. And here in Canada, we know that all too well from the 2012 London Summer Olympics, where Canada's 4x100 team was disqualified and lost the bronze medal because the third leg runner stepped on the line. Nanaka and Takeuchi then go on to use a rugby game to describe tacit knowledge, the creation of tacit knowledge, here and now knowledge. You can well imagine a championship rugby match where the players have an ultimate goal of scoring a try, as many as they can, and they're working together, problem solving, in constant innovation, in constant motion, in constant problem solving, all in reaction to the changing circumstances that their competition is providing to them, all with the ultimate goal in mind of working together to achieve the goal, that of scoring tries. And this is exactly the type of knowledge creation that we want in our firms. So it's incumbent upon us to create an environment that taps into the tacit knowledge of all our key stakeholders, our employees, our supply chain partners, including our vendors, our customers, and to tap into that tacit knowledge to discover and create new tacit knowledge toward improving customer value. We want to then take that tacit knowledge, convert it to explicit knowledge so we can implement it, and then combine it with existing explicit knowledge to create an even stronger advantage. It's important to note that this is not a one-time process, but must be done continuously to create and preserve a competitive advantage. So Stephen's now going to apply this to a business case that he was involved with.
Thank you, Brian. The case study is quite interesting. It was a leasing firm, and I think, as we all know, leasing firms basically buy things on behalf of our company and rent those assets to us. This particular leasing firm was a mid-cap manufacturing equipment leaser. Basically, it played in the range of leasing $500,000 to $500,000 capital equipment to small to medium-sized enterprises, machines like a lathe or a milling machine or a small to a mid-sized CNC machine, etc. Interestingly enough, leasing firms have all the elements of a supply chain. You have customers, you have the leasing firm, which provides the finance. The leasing firm buys the capital equipment from a vendor or a distributor. The distributor or vendor buys the capital equipment from a manufacturer, who in turn buys raw materials in order to construct such a machine. This company was rather interesting in that it was emerging from bankruptcy, and the industry, the leasing industry as a whole, is hyper-competitive. It truly is a red ocean. In North America alone, there are well over 10,000 leasing firms, which includes banks who also lease. So it's a very bloody space, and the real question is, how could this firm emerge from bankruptcy and get a competitive advantage that was defendable and meaningful to the customer? And the solution was really quite straightforward. Take take a best practice approach, which is a supply chain view of the entire system in order to attempt to discover a competitive advantage. The first place we know from our training is we really need to take two different perspectives when we analyze a particular situation. We need to be effective. To be effective, that means being able to generate customers who are willing to pay us money. And the second thing we need to do is we need to be very efficient doing it, because the basic equation of business is profit equals revenue minus cost. And that faces us all the time. In this industry, from a customer perspective, time was important. Typically with small to medium-sized enterprises, they're under time pressure. They might have landed a major contract. They need the equipment to get bolted in and started to begin their learning curve and ramp up. And the industry average at the time of the case was most leasing firms took about 24 hours to make a decision. From a supply chain perspective, in order to achieve great supply chain performance, one wanted a low default rate on approved leases. And what that means is that the lease will be good for the term of the lease. The customer will make every payment. Now, if the customer doesn't make every payment and the firm has to repossess the milling machine, shall we say, that costs money. Transportation, disconnection, attempting to auctioning it, and it might auction for significantly less than its current value. And really what you'd like to do is avoid significant extra supply chain costs. And the average default rate in the industry at the time of the case was approximately 5%. So dealing with critical success factor number one, speed, there really were two different kinds of knowledge at play, explicit and tacit. The explicit knowledge was very clear. Leasing firms have supply chains, and I've described a supply chain to you. We also know that supply chains can have waste, and tools such as value stream mapping, which are a best practice, are valuable in identifying waste, even in a situation such as a leasing firm, which is not a traditional manufacturing firm. The sneaky little secret there is that best practices are transferable from industry to industry. So methodologies that supply chain people are trained in, such as lean, can actually find their way into the leasing industry. From a tacit perspective, what leasing firms really do is they process decisions versus processing product. So the perspective that's important for one to take when performing this analysis is to treat the decision as a product, value stream map it, and in the process of doing that, some very interesting things happen. As we all know from our training, value streams cover both flow of material and process, but also the information systems that trigger actions. And in the process of developing the current stream map, the team was able to uncover several alternative high-speed information opportunities that weren't traditional to the leasing industry, but were used in other industries. They tested the implementation of this in order to improve the process, and the outcomes were quite astonishing. Without changing default rate from its current level of performance, the business was able to approve 50% of leases in 15 minutes or less versus the industry standard of 1 day. The other 50% were approved or declined within 3 hours or less versus 1 day, a significant advantage. Critical success factor number two, quality. The issue here, of course, is will the customer that we've chosen to lease the equipment to pay every month for the term of the lease? Well, the interesting explicit knowledge here is the team uncovered that all leasing firms use the same basic data to make decisions. Therefore, it's really impossible to get an advantage because it depends on how much risk you want to take as a leasing firm. However, when one value stream mapped the supply chain and engaged with the people that were running those various segments of the supply chain, an interesting question was asked. Is there information in this supply chain that other firms aren't using that can improve the quality of the leasing decision? And the answer was yes. In fact, 2 new pieces of information were discovered. They were prototyped and then implemented, and again, the results were astonishing. The default rate for this firm dropped on average from industry average 5% to less than 0.5%. In fact, for quite a long period, it resided around 0.14%. And of course, that created a substantial competitive advantage for the firm. Ryan.
So what's the secret sauce in all of this? Well, recall that in and of themselves, firms do not create new knowledge. The source of all new knowledge and innovation is embedded in the tacit knowledge of all individuals. Therefore, firms must create an environment that taps into the tacit knowledge of its key stakeholders throughout its supply chain, including employees, its customers, its suppliers, and then convert that new knowledge, that new tacit knowledge, into explicit knowledge that is unique to the firm. Note the quote from Drs. Nanaka and Takeuchi on the middle of the slide. Organizational knowledge creation is a continuous and dynamic interaction between tacit and explicit knowledge, never ending. The process must be continuous and dynamic if firms are to develop a sustainable competitive advantage. Lifelong learning and the continuous application of explicit knowledge you've acquired from APICS certification will allow you to gain experience in creating new game-changing tacit knowledge, which you can use to improve not only yourself, but your organization as well. That said, the diffusion of knowledge requires the dynamic and continuous interaction of tacit and explicit knowledge through the interaction and the shared experience of individuals if we want to truly create new knowledge and be innovative. This in turn will alter the DNA of the firm, providing for a unique, sustainable, competitive advantage.
Are there any questions?
Great. Thank you so much, Steve and Brian. That was a great presentation. And now I'll open the floor for questions. As a reminder, you can type your question in the questions box on the GoToWebinar toolbar on your screen. And we'll now give you a few moments to send in your questions. Okay, so our first question comes from Monica. Monica wants to know, what's a red ocean?
That's a great question, Monica. Thanks for asking. Early on in the presentation, I pointed out Dr. Michael Porter's approach or his work in terms of sustainable or competitive advantage, or competitive business strategy, I should say. And he talks about it in the context of the 5 forces within any industry, and those 5 forces work together to create the competitive rules within an industry. And as such, it's considered to be a bounded industry, and the rules create the boundaries for that industry. That said, as competition heats up within that bounded industry, it becomes like a bloody red ocean, and that's a term that was coined by the Drs. Malborn and Kim in their research, which ultimately they published in their book, Blue Ocean Strategy. That's a book I would highly recommend for our listeners. In the Blue Ocean Strategy, Drs. Malborn and Kim present the argument that, in fact, industries aren't bounded, They're not the rules within the industry. The forces do not create the rules, but rather we create the rules. So the objective is for us to create an environment that focuses on satisfying the customer and eliminating things that simultaneously cost us money that the customer is not interested in, focused on not only satisfying the customer, but creating new value for the customer, new innovative value for the customer, and breaking out of the red ocean, creating a new blue ocean of uncontested market space. So the term red ocean comes from the work of Drs. Malborn and Kim, and I would recommend that you search out their book, Blue Ocean Strategy.
Great, thank you. We did get a comment in from Steve. Steve wanted to say that your presentation really highlights the importance of employee retention, so thank you for sharing all of these insights.
Thank you.
Oh, of course. Our next question comes from Rodney. Rodney wants to know, what are some strategies to convert tacit knowledge to explicit knowledge?
Well, Doctors Nanaka and Takeuchi point out that there's a conversion process that takes place when new knowledge is created. And the conversion process involves 4 conversion steps. And they capture that in what they call their SECI model, S-E-C-I model. And it speaks to the 4 conversion steps. The first step is a socialization step. That's the interaction of individuals to try and draw out new tacit knowledge. The second step is the conversion of that new tacit knowledge into a new concept, or to externalize that tacit knowledge that is beginning to be developed. The third step is combination, or combining that new concept, that tacit model, with the existing knowledge within the firm in order to be able to create new knowledge within the firm. And then the fourth step is to internalize it or implement it to our advantage within the firm. Now, in order for that to happen, they talk about what does it take to create the environment for that to happen.
Practically, and again, speaking as a former turnaround CEO, the techniques can be very simple. A technique that I've personally used and still use to this day, because I do have a venture capital firm with some partners, is in any new situation, I personally walk an order through the entire business process. And that helps me from a very high level. I can see how the business works, but more importantly, I can understand practically what the opportunities are and what the knowledge level is about the process and the process improvements possible as one walks through the organization, talking to the people who actually do the work. That also solves a key implementation problem, because if one discovers through that process that there might be the possibility of meaningful tacit knowledge, one has already created a relationship with the people that have that knowledge, and since you're at a fairly high and influential level in an organization, you can motivate the discovery process.
Excellent.
Nanaka and Takeuchi, if I may, Jennifer, Nanaka and Takeuchi also describe concrete steps that you can take to create the environment that allows for that to happen. They talk about identifying the intention, autonomy of employees. They address it in the context of what they call fluctuation and chaos, redundancy, requisite variety. I'm not going to go into those right now, but I would recommend that you get their book, The Knowledge Creating Company, and read through that. We also talk about it in our article in terms of what does it take to create the environment. Critical for supply chain managers to create a work environment that supports the knowledge creating process, enabling unique game-changing knowledge. Managers need to value and emphasize attributes such as entrepreneurship, creativity, innovation, adaptability, risk-taking, growth, etc. So all of that needs to be part of that process.
Great, thank you both. We have another definition question. What's a zero-sum game?
Zero-sum game is really very simple. If we both do the same thing the same way, we're going to get the same results. One team or one business will not have an advantage over the other team. And of course, we'll try to seek to get an advantage by doing things like dropping price. And of course, that gets matched by your opponent. So at the end of the day, no one has an advantage, and you drive down to the lowest level of tolerance for whatever profitability you're willing to take. And of course, if one firm is able to live with significantly less profitability than the next one, they become the winner. The problem is they're stuck there because there's always new entrants in. So as Brian pointed out, one needs to create that blue space where you do something so unique and valuable for a customer, they come to you first, and then you execute it in the most efficient way possible. You can actually get a price increase, which means you get more revenue for the same thing, and your cost structure is lower, which means that your costs are less. Basic formula of business, profit equals revenue minus cost. You end up with substantial profitability, very happy customers who want to do business with you.
Great, thank you. Our next question is from Matthew. He just wants to confirm, is tacit knowledge in a way similar to continuous improvement process?
It's a component of it. Continuous improvement requires innovation, the creation of new knowledge. And if we recognize that new knowledge, the basis of all new knowledge is tacit knowledge, then yes, it forms the basis for continuous improvement.
Tacit knowledge can be something as simple as having an operator in your business who just seems to be about 5% better than everybody else. And the question is, why is that operator better? That operator has tacit knowledge which allows them to be more efficient. The key is to be able to extract that tacit knowledge, make it explicit within the organization. Now you have a new standard operating procedure that you can train all the other operators in. And instead of one operator just operating 5% better, everybody operates better.
And then doing that on a continuous basis.
Great, thanks. Our next question goes back to the case study. Gayleen asks, how did the company identify the new information that enabled the improvements?
That is a really great question. A number of years ago, I was involved in some research for a global consulting firm, and the question that I was tasked to solve, which was, where do innovations come from? So through a survey of well over 4,000 global firms, it became very clear that approximately 75% of innovations came from the supply chain. Only 7% came from the highly paid consultants, which somewhat disappointed them, but on the other hand created an opportunity for them. The ideas came from the people that were processing the leases and the interaction they had with the customer, and the distributors of the machinery, who often had prior relationships with these customers. And there was information that was not on any credit scoring form that existed, and that could be captured, tested, and put into the decision model.
Great, thank you. Our next question comes from Debbie. She wants to know, does tacit knowledge provide greater competitive advantage than explicit knowledge?
Absolutely. Truthfully, it's really the only sustainable source of competitive advantage. Things like explicit knowledge like lean can provide a temporary competitive advantage, but lean is copyable. You can hire people with those skills. You can engage people to teach your organization those skills. But unique competitive advantage, something that you can preserve for a period of time, is really the combination of the two. And that's the key thing. It's the combination and constantly trying to seek new tacit knowledge.
Sounds good. Our next question comes from Tim. Tim wants to know, is implementing best practice basically copying? And if so, why is copying bad?
Copying is great. We can copy anything. We have lots of copy machines. The internet allows us to copy. The proof is in the implementation, though. And that's where you get into the question of leadership. And again, one of the reasons we chose the APICS competency model here for our degree program is the model emphasizes leadership and implementation skills. It's easy for an organization to say they're lean or they've copied the Toyota production system, but how is it actually facilitated in real life? And that takes leadership. And many organizations that attempt to copy these best practices think by reading a book or hiring a consultant it'll all work. Well, it doesn't work that way. The system, you have to have systemic leadership from the top to the bottom of the organization to be able to make these things work. And frankly, that's hard to do.
Thank you. Our next question comes from Robert. Robert wants to know if you can provide an example of tacit knowledge that you would have in a production or logistics environment.
Well, Stephen gave us an example earlier of the operator who just seems to be able to get that little bit extra out of his processes. It's important to remind ourselves that tacit knowledge is within each one of us, and it's difficult for us to express. So it requires the interaction of other people to help us to be able to draw that out. Let me give you an example not from manufacturing. Let's talk about a sculptor. You're learning how to, you've got a piece of marble in front of you and you want to learn how to carve out the statue of David. The sculptor could write down on a, or the master can write down on a piece of paper and hand it to you and say, there it is, now go ahead and carve out the statue of David. And quite frankly, that explicit knowledge that he wrote out on that piece of paper, well, I think, at least for me anyway, it would do me no good. It requires the interaction of that master and the apprentice sculptor, if you will, to work together, to dialogue together, so that that master sculptor can draw out that tacit knowledge from that new individual, tell them to look for the fissures in the stone, hold your chisel in this particular way, and ultimately that new apprentice sculptor can begin to draw out their tacit knowledge, creating new knowledge in and of themselves and expressing it ultimately in explicit knowledge in the form of a sculptor. It's very difficult to draw out. It's hard to point to examples.
I've got a home run example in my career which frankly blew me away. A few years ago, before I became an academic, actually the last executive job I held before becoming a professor was to turn around a former Roundtree Nestle company that had been bought by some American venture capitalists. And unfortunately, the business had several factories. The main factory was located in a large southwestern Ontario city. And this was candy manufacturing. And of course, as we all know, candy involves sugar. And sugar, if you put excess sugar into wastewater treatment system, the public utility wastewater treatment process thinks it's cocaine or heroin, and it throws those systems completely out of whack. Well, unfortunately, we couldn't afford to replace the capital equipment that was causing this problem. So this particular city gave us an ultimatum: we're going to shut you down if you can't fix it. So how the problem was solved was by going to the entire hourly workforce, explaining what the problem was, recognizing that we did not have enough capital reserves to fix the equipment. How could we resolve this problem in a unique way? Because in spite of someone like myself who's got 4 graduate degrees and 1 engineering degree, I wasn't smart enough. And interestingly enough, a young lady in the audience said in the team the business, and there were a few thousand people in this business. She said, "This is sugared water, right?" And I said, "Yeah, that's essentially what it is." She says, "It's all very clean coming out of our processes." I said, "Of course it is. It's just very clean water that has a high sugar content because we meet the FDA and HPB requirements for food safety." She said, "My dad's a farmer. We farm pigs and cows, and he belongs to a consortium that is always looking for an advantage. And he's tried to buy sugared water before to improve the flavor of their product." The end result was that a number of local farming consortiums that were in the pig and beef business basically bought a recovery tank and process, paid for it, put it on site, and paid us for our wastewater. That's an example of tacit knowledge that resided within the organization, and none of our other competitors were selling their waste. So not only did we not have to pay wastewater treatment fees to the local city, which was a substantial cost savings, we got a brand new revenue stream that was very sustainable.
I think it's important to point out in Stephen's example what took place there, the interaction of people. And it was only through that interaction and asking the right questions that that young woman said, "Here's an idea." And that resulted in a win-win for that organization.
That's a great story. Thank you guys for sharing that. Our next question comes from Aleem. Aleem wants to know, how can a company secure its tacit knowledge base in today's highly collaborative business environment?
Go ahead, Brian.
Secure it into a highly collaborative business environment. Well, then I think, again, that goes back to creating the environment. It goes back to a recognition that as new knowledge is created, there's a knowledge capture and knowledge management system that's in place in the organization. And really that goes back to the point Stephen made earlier, to leadership in the organization. It's a recognition that knowledge creation and innovation must occur. What's the process for that to occur, and how do we capture that? So that's really up to management and leadership to develop that knowledge capture and implementation system and knowledge management system in the firm.
I had the great fortune to spend the first decade of my apprenticeship with that little American company called Procter & Gamble. And I recall my first week of work where I became midnight shift manager running 2 diaper lines in a small town in Ontario. My plant manager telling me, "Steve, remember, you pay for the hands, but you get the head for free." And Brian's right. You need a leadership style that is positive, not a negative leadership style. You slide further on grease than gravel. But you also need a system that underlies that captures and tests the knowledge, and then rewards. And the rewards don't have to be monetary. They can be something as simple as recognition. Most people like to be recognized for contributing to a firm. And if you can do this effectively by having leadership that encourages engagement and then testing and codifying that so you capture the knowledge, it's a formula that isn't very new, but it's something that is rarely applied.
Thank you. I think the question is also kind of asking, how do you prevent your tacit knowledge from being leaked to competitors or others that you might not want to have that advantage that you have?
Well, that's going to happen eventually because people move around. As Brian stated earlier, the real key is you do not sit on your laurels. Once you have discovered new knowledge, you go out and you discover more knowledge. It has to be a continuous process. And that's what the essence of continuous improvement is. The interesting thing is once you begin this process and you start ahead of the competitor, you're moving in a superior position on the learning curve. And you can preserve that advantage as long as you preserve the culture that drives that continuous improvement.
I'm glad you mentioned culture. Our next question from Giorgio asks, do you think there are any specific cultures that might have problems finding and implementing tacit knowledge?
Yeah, are there any cultures that might have problems implementing tacit knowledge. Yeah, but particularly organizations that are heavily top-down. I was very happy personally for the fact those organizations existed, because as a turnaround executive, they provided an unlimited base of business opportunities for me. But organizations that tend to be top-down oriented, where they don't recognize the contribution and the knowledge that the people that have the work, that do the work actually have, it's very difficult to be successful in those environments. And ultimately, those organizations underperform, and many times they become lagging competitors in an industry, and are either they become insolvent, they get bought up, or whatever. I think Darwin's theory eventually comes for all of those firms.
I also would point out that Takeuchi addressed that question in their book, The Knowledge Creating Company, and I would again suggest that you have a look at that.
Great, thank you. Our next question is it possible to apply this overall concept in a service environment?
Well, yeah, in a service environment, I've been doing a fair amount of work lately in hospitals, and we've had a number of breakthroughs working with local hospitals and hospitals outside our region, using value stream mapping techniques in order to improve the effectiveness and the speed of healthcare. So absolutely it does work. There's all kinds of articles and textbooks out there for almost every industry in terms of how you can use the basic APICS tools in order to create new knowledge.
These principles apply in any industry, in any sector, public sector, private, manufacturing, transportation, logistics, retail, service industry. All these techniques apply. Where you have people working together in a series of processes to deliver a product or service, these principles apply.
Great. We've both had some great anecdotes and some great book recommendations throughout this Q&A, so thank you for that. And our last question actually is about books. Owen asks, is it necessary to read all of Peter Drucker's books? Owen's already read 5, but there's a lot more, he noticed.
Well, he lived a long time, and he was the most prolific writer. My favorite, I have 2 favorites. One of the original ones, The Practice of Management, and another textbook that was published recently. I believe the title of it is A Compendium of Druckerisms. And it's really a listing of his favorite phrases along with the references to the research that created those phrases. And I find work like that very meaningful when I'm trying to communicate an improvement process to someone who works in the real world. They buy into those things fairly quickly.
Fantastic. Well, thank you both for all of your insights. And that's all the questions we have time for today. Brian, could you advance to the next slide, please? If you think of any other questions for our presenters, you can reach them at the information on the screen. And if you have any comments about today's presentation, you can email us at feedback@apics.org and we'll take a look at your comments. And now, on behalf of APICS, I'd like to thank our speakers and all of our participants for their time today. This concludes today's edition of APICS Extra Live. All content and materials included in this edition of APICS Extra Live are the property of APICS, Brian Watson, and Steve Hummel, and are protected by the United States and international copyright laws. All rights are reserved. Thank you so much for joining us today, and have a great rest of your day.